Well, good morning, our final day through the Gospel of John, and indeed through the four Gospels. Today I want to comment on three personal encounters between Jesus and three individuals. So let's have a look at those. The first of these three people is Mary Magdalene. And Jesus meets Mary at the tomb. She's the very first one to go to the tomb early in the morning before the sun even rises. And she's upset because she sees the body is gone. And after speaking to some of the disciples, she comes back. Peter and John leave after having seen as well. And then Jesus appears to her. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" She, supposing him to be the gardener, said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him, "Rabboni," which is to say, teacher. Now listen to this. Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. But go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." And then Mary goes and tells the other disciples. So just remember Mary's story. This was a woman who was an incredibly broken woman, probably an incredibly sinful woman. She had 7 demons. How do I know she was an incredibly sinful woman? You don't have 7 demons without being incredibly sinful. She would have lived a morally bankrupt life, possessed by 7 demons. And previously we've seen that Jesus cast those demons out of her when he first met her. And for the rest of Jesus' ministry, Mary is there. She's following him. She's with him. It is an understatement to say that Mary loved Jesus and she completely depended on him. It doesn't seem that she was married, that there was any kind of support structure around her. She looked to this man, Jesus, who had completely revolutionized her life, set her free, and brought her into the light. She would have seen Jesus as irreplaceable in her life. She would have leaned on him and depended on him and clung to him. You can imagine Mary's distress at the thought of losing Jesus. And so she sees him again and he says her name, and all of a sudden she realizes it's him. She runs up to him and she collapses on him and holds him tight. "Don't ever go away again. I need you." And what does Jesus say to her? Don't cling to me. Don't cling now to me physically, because I've not yet gone to my Father. Mary, when I go to the Father, it is to your advantage, because if I don't go away, then I will not send the helper to you. But if I go away, I will send him to you. And when he has come, he will be a counselor, a friend, a comforter, a guide. You can cling to me even when I am gone, Mary. You know how important that message was for Mary. And maybe that's a message you need to hear. That though you can't cling physically to Jesus now, you can depend on him. You can cling to him because he's gone to the Father. And the Father has all authority. And we know that when Jesus went to the Father, he was given all authority in heaven and on earth. And he sends the Spirit into the world. You can depend on him. You may not have had a father in this life who you can or could depend on. You might not have a father figure in this life or someone caring for you. You might be a divorcee with much brokenness and regret from your past, and all you want is someone to care for you and protect you. Well, you can cling to Jesus today, and he will care for you, and he will protect you, and he will provide for you. In the same way Mary wanted Jesus to do physically, he will do from heaven. Second person Jesus encounters is Thomas. Thomas, obviously, you know the story. He had not believed when the other 11 disciples had seen Jesus. He wasn't there. They told him, he says, look, unless I put my finger in the nail marks in his hands and my hand in his side where that spear went in, I will not believe. But after 8 days, his disciples were again inside and Thomas with them. And Jesus came, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst and said, peace to you. Then he said to Thomas, and here we see him having one of these personal encounters, seeking out an individual. Reach your finger here and look at my hands. And reach your hand here and put it into my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing. And Thomas answered and said, my Lord and my God. Thomas is actually the first person to call Jesus God. And he was right. So whereas Jesus says to Mary, you can cling to me even after I've gone, Jesus says to Thomas, you must stop doubting and you must believe. There is no future in doubting, Thomas. Your whole future, your whole calling, everything that you were placed on this earth to do will be unlocked through faith. You must stop doubting and believe. Maybe that's a message for you this morning. And then the last person Jesus encounters in this kind of personal way is Peter. Peter had been called by Jesus to be the leader of the church. And I brought this out a couple of days ago, but just remember, you know, we live in a day and time where there's billions of Christians. This was the very genesis of the church. There were these 12 men, well 11 now without Judas, and the entire salvation of the world lay in these men's hands. Jesus was calling them to now go and do the things that he had done. He was the one going out and preaching. Now it was their turn. He was calling them to go and change the earth, which is what they did. And Peter was to be the leader of that. And yet Peter, man, he was always like emotional, and yet that's what Jesus loved about him. Peter's the one that John gets the tomb, he sees the cloths like just lying in a pile. Peter arrives and he doesn't stop, he just goes right in. And then he sees the cloth that had been on Jesus' head separate, folded by itself. And he believed. He was the first one actually to know that Jesus had risen. Why? Because he was willing just to go all the way in. You know, grave robbers don't fold up one of the headcloths and put it neatly. He saw that, and then John goes in and he sees it and he believes. Peter, he's a great guy, but prone to rashness and mistakes. And he has denied Jesus 3 times. And the guilt, one of the other Gospels says that Jesus turned and looked at him after the 3rd time and a rooster crowed. And Peter went out and wept bitterly. He was a man with a heart the size of the world. Can you imagine how that hurt him emotionally to know that he had done that? Well, Jesus comes to Peter and he comforts him. How? He asks Peter 3 times, as Peter had denied him 3 times, do you love me, Peter? Peter says, yes, I love you. You know that I love you. Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. 3 times, do you love me? But an interesting way he asks the question, he says, do you love me more than these? Who's he talking about? So could he be saying, Peter, do you love me more than these other men love me? I don't think that's what he meant. Or it could be saying, do you love me more than you love them? Do you love me more than you love your friends? Could mean that, but I don't think so. He has said to Peter and to the other disciples, throw the net on the other side of the boat. They throw the net after having fished all night. They weren't supposed to be fishing. Remember, Jesus said to them, follow me, I will make you fishers of men. They had a calling which they were ignoring. They'd gone back to the old form of fishing. Toss the net over. They toss it over, 153 fish, they drag it in. They get to the shore. What do they find? Jesus has already got fish. I don't need your fish. There's this massive pile of fish lying on the shore now. Okay? 153 fish piled up on the shore. They're having breakfast. Peter, do you love me more than these? Do you love me more than your old life? Do you love me more than this pile of fish? Do you love me more than the job that you feel comfortable in, that you find your identity in? Because I've called you to something different. You are to leave the past behind you, Peter. Do you love me more than your past? That's the question he's asking. And so Peter, in that encounter with Jesus, he is invited to leave the past and those two things of his past. He's invited to leave his guilt. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? You know that I love you. So he gets Peter to say, I love you 3 times, as he had denied him 3 times. He's forgiving him. He's restoring him. It's okay, Peter. I forgive you. Leave your guilt behind. But also, leave your old identity behind. Leave your old calling behind. I have called you to something else. Are you willing to follow me? So, in that encounter, as he said to Mary, you can cling to me even after I'm gone. And as he said to Thomas, you must stop doubting and believe. He was saying to Peter, forget your past, your guilt, and your fishing, and do what I have called you to do. And maybe that's a message for you this morning. Forget your past and do what I've called you to do. Well, God bless you. And I'll see you when we pick things up in the book of Acts.